Nirasya sarva sandeham ekikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Idam Shri Radhika prana natapada sarojayo yena prema nubhutyasha dattatam Shri Gurum bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilasha Jitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Muda Kedato Vande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdnani Patyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratishe Namah Jayatam Surato Pango Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambujo Radha Madana Mohano Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gosvami Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Adadana Strinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisam Janma Janmani Raganu Gami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajantum Shri Rupa Parakamala Shrita Chetasam Me Chittam Satam Madhukari Yatupada Padme Ya Ramya Nikilaga Sangha Shamani Shotratitim Sangata Ya Sadhya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Ya Dhyata Hridaye Brajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandhani Sajiyad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. So, by the grace of Shri Kadayuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Maha Sagar, Shri Gauranga Maha Prabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we will discuss Padyavali, and we resume in our discussion of verse 32, namely Sriman Mahaprabhu's famous instruction, Tṛṇād sunīcena taror sahiṣṇunā amāninā mānadena kīrtanīyaḥ sadā hariḥ. And we're discussing taror sahiṣṇunā, the tolerance like that or greater than a tree. And we've moved through Chakravarti Pad's Tika on many points in verses 13 and 14 in chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita, where Bhagavan describes the qualities of a bhakta who is dear to him and overviews the interrelationship between these qualities. And we came up finally to the last of the qualities mentioned in this verse, which proves to be a very significant one. So we'll resume our discussion from this point on. And all those, as we discussed, all of Chakravarti Pad's analysis regarding this verse is down to earth, it's practical. He's saying, how can I be free from enmity towards people who are inimical to me? How can I deal with, the troubles that they create and so forth? So how one will achieve equiposition, the importance of being free from egotism and attachments, the importance of forbearance, all of these things have been discussed. And we also covered some additional points. In addition to seeing things as one's prarabdha karma, which one is simply due to undergo, one can also perceive the unfolding of events as grace upon oneself from Bhagavan, or moreover as itself Bhagavan's protection. Even the hardships one goes through can themselves be seen as acts of Bhagavan's grace, acts of Bhagavan's protection, acts of Bhagavan's, so to speak, treatment for one's disease of material existence, which in some cases requires bitter medicine. So in this way, perceiving things as meaningful and as worthy of being not only tolerated, but honored and learned from, and recognized to be of value, and at the same time to thereby let go of any sort of enmity or ill will towards persons who may be the agents in the administration of that bitter medicine. All these things were discussed. So finally, we come to the point of that the verse ends on, as to how one can practically acquire these qualities that have been discussed, or all these composite elements that are requisite to achieving this state of being supportive even of those who are harmful to oneself, or what is, in a nutshell, called being tolerant like a tree. So I pick up in the same file from where we were last time. Finally, Sri Chakravarti Pad elucidates an important fundamental purport with respect to Sri Bhagavan's description of the qualities of his bhakta. It is as though Sri Bhagavan says, the cause in all cases, that is, in regard to all of the aforementioned qualities of my bhakta, is that one is of mind and intellect offered to me, meaning one is devoted to meditation and contemplation of me. Such a bhakta is dear to me, meaning such a bhakta pleases me greatly. The point made here is that the practice of engaging the mind and senses in acts of bhakti that fundamentally give rise, it is the practice of engaging the mind and senses in acts of bhakti that fundamentally gives rise to all of the aforementioned qualities found in a bhakta. Thus, none of these qualities are conventional forms of virtuousness that are also found in non-bhaktas, but rather are expressions of the power and influence of bhakti itself. Sri Chakravarti Pad explains this point in his commentary on 12.15, and does so by speaking in the voice of Bhagavan Sri Krishna and with reference to a relevant verse from the Bhagavatam. Quote, furthermore, as per the statement in 5.18.12, the suras, along with all qualities, reside in full within one who has unconditional bhakti to Bhagavan. Other qualities that are causes of my pleasure, like those described in Bhagavad Gita 12.13.14, are manifested of their own accord in my bhakta, by means of bhakti to me being repeatedly practiced. You should hear of these as well. Thus he describes with 5 verses, beginning with Yasmat, he speaks the following verses of the Gita, or he further elaborates on the qualities of his bhakta. So the point here is that these qualities of tolerance, of equipoise, and so forth, are all not just those same qualities as they might be found in anyone, but they are the equipoise that emerges from the mind being focused on Bhagavan. They are the tolerance that emerges from the mind being focused on Bhagavan. They're all outcomes of having offered the mind, or having offered the self to Bhagavan, and made a central most focus upon remaining intent or aware of Bhagavan through and through. In other words, samukhyata, or what Jiva Gosvami has called the principle abhideya of the Shastra. So, this same point that Chakravarti Pad is emphasizing here is also made by Jiva Gosvami in the list of qualities of a bhakta in the 11th canto, which we've quoted repeatedly throughout this discussion. So, we'll look at that. Sri Jiva also emphasizes this principle that bhakti is the cause of a bhakta's qualities. In his commentary regarding the aforementioned list of the qualities of a sadhu, that is a bhakta, stated by Bhagavan Sri Krishna in Srimad Bhagavatam 11:11-29-31, which includes mention of the qualities of tolerance, non-conceitedness, and respectfulness. So 3 of the 4 qualities that are mentioned in this verse that we're discussing now are also given in this list. So what's significant here is this point that Jiva Gosvami makes in regard to this list of qualities, which is a bit cryptic, but is as follows. Quote, herein, that is, in the 3 verses under discussion, of shelter in me, mat-sharana, is the qualificand, or visheshya. That's all he says. But this is a very significant statement, so one has to be a bit educated to grasp what he's saying. So there are 2 important words in Sanskrit, visheshan and visheshya, or the visheshya is the qualificand, or the thing to be described, and visheshanas are describers or modifiers, qualifiers of the subject or of that which is being described. So by identifying a bhakta, or identifying this description of mat-sharana, the person whose sharan is me, or the person whose sharana is Krishna, that person is the person being described in this list. And all these other things are qualities of that person. So in other words, it's not that there's a tolerant person, and that tolerant person is also respectful, and also sheltered in Krishna, and also kind, and also compassionate, and so on. Rather, he's saying, there is a person who's sheltered in Krishna, and that person, by virtue of being in that shelter, is compassionate, is respectful, is this, is that, is all these other things. So and grammatically, you could justify either interpretation. In other words, these are all just statements given in an identical case. So there's grammatically scope for a multitude of interpretations. So Jiva Gosvami is specifying, based on the broader theological context, that this ought to be identified as the qualificand, or the visheshya, and the rest of the compounds or elements in the verse as visheshanas, or modifiers or qualifiers of that qualificand. So the import of this brief comment is that a bhakta, being one whose sole shelter is Sri Krishna, is the principal defining characteristic of a sadhu, that is a bhakta. And all the other qualities mentioned in the passage are adjectives or visheshanas that describe other qualities that emerge as effects of this principal characteristic of a bhakta. So what this implies is that unless one has taken shelter in Krishna, there's no scope for having any of the qualities described in any of these verses, or having any of the qualities described in this verse of Mahaprabhu, as per the way that they're being referred to, or the intended sense of them in these statements. You might find a juxtaposition of someone who's not a Sharanagata exhibiting the quality of tolerance. That's fine. We don't debate that on occasion you may find many qualities in other persons. But those qualities exhibited by other persons and the qualities that are exhibited by bhaktas are not the same, because they have fundamentally different objectives in their enactment. And that's stressed in the verse that Chakravarti Pad cited in his commentary just now to make this point, and which is elaborated on in the commentary that I quote just below. So we'll get to that in one sec. Sri Rupa Pad cites this same verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, which was cited by Sri Chakravarti Pad in relation to all the qualities of a bhakta, described in the Gita, chapter 12, to substantiate his explanation in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of bhaktis being a bestower of good qualities, or sadgurani pradabtvam. So, in the first chapter of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, after Uttama Bhakti is defined in the seminal verse, Sannivilashita Shunyam, etc., then Rupa Goswami identifies, and he gives then some references to Shastra to support why he gave this definition. And then the second point, so to speak, of the chapter is he lists 6 of the special qualities or effects that come from this Uttama Bhakti. So this is also a well-known verse which says, Kleshagni Shubhada Moksha Lagutakrit Sudurlabha Sandrananda Visheshatma Shri Krishna Karshini Chasa. So the first two, Kleshagni, this bhakti is a remover of all types of affliction, and it is Shubhada, it is a bestower or a cause of all types of auspiciousness. And then he creates subcategories for these, different types of afflictions that are removed and different types of auspiciousness that are created by bhakti. So one of them is what is referred to here, or sadgunadi, that the auspiciousness, one type of auspiciousness is having virtues. So bhakti is a cause or leads to the bestowal of virtues upon a person. So the idea then is that to be a bhakta, you have to be a sharanagata. So to have any of these qualities as they manifest in bhaktas, one has to be a bhakta, one has to be a sharanagata, which fundamentally means out of conviction in Bhagavan, focusing one's mind and attention and actions upon him. So the verse that is under discussion that illustrates this point is as follows. The devas, along with all qualities, reside in full within one who has unconditional bhakti to Bhagavan. How could a non-bhakta of Hari, running outwards after the unreal as a result of desire, have the qualities of the Mahatmas? So persons, running outwards after the unreal as a result of desire essentially means people pursuing sensual pleasure in the world in their embodied state, identified with the body. So they may at times exhibit courage or honesty or many conventional types of virtue. That's fine. There's no debate that there are virtues in such people. That's not. Sometimes this verse has been translated in a way where it leads people to the assertion that one who's not a bhakta has no type of quality at all. But rather what's being said here is that those who have this desire and pursuit of the external things, they will not have the qualities that Mahatmas have. It's not saying they don't have any qualities, they have qualities, but they don't have the same qualities that Mahatmas have, which is to say that the tolerance, the kindness, etc. that Mahatmas exhibit is categorically distinct from the conventional type of qualities shown by others. So this point is brought out by Samipad in his Tika, which is as follows. The speaker, Prahlad Maharaj, describes the result of the disappearance of mental contamination. In other words, to the extent that chitta shuddhi takes place, or the purification of the psyche takes place, these qualities come forth. Unconditional means desireless. So what is the contamination of the mind? It's desire for mundane things. What is purity of the mind? The absence of such desire. As the mind is purified by bhakti, bhakti to Hari manifests therein. And then, with the occurrence of its grace, all the devas, along with all qualities, such as dharma and gyan, reside in full, that is, permanently reside there in the mind of a bhakta. On account, however, of the impossibility of bhakti to Hari being had by one who is attached to household life and so forth, how could the qualities of the Mahatmas, beginning with knowledge and non-attachment, be had by such a person? They couldn't. It's a rhetorical question. Such a person is one whose mind is ever engaged in running outwards after the unreal, that is, the pleasures of the objects of the senses as a result of desire. From this comment, it can be understood that all the qualities in a bhakta manifest within the bhakta by the power of bhakti, to the extent that the mind of the bhakta is purified of desire for anything and everything apart from bhakti. In gist, unconditional, that is desireless, bhakti and the qualities it gives rise to, such as tolerance, equanimity, non-conceitedness, respectfulness, and so on, can exist in the mind only insofar as contrary desires are purged from the mind. So the obstacle to these qualities is one's desires and attachments to worldly things. Plain and simple. The quality of being tolerant, the quality of being tolerant like a tree, and so forth, is thus in essence a highly purified state of mind. Hearing some echoing. I hear some noise. Prabhu, could you mute yourself, please? The quality of being tolerant like a tree, and so forth, is thus in essence a highly purified state of mind that has come about as a result of the mind being thoroughly absorbed in acts of bhakti, and principally those of meditation and contemplation of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, as was stated earlier by Sri Chakravarti Pad. The cause in all cases, that is, in regard to all the aforementioned qualities of a bhakta, is that one is of mind and intellect offered to me, meaning one is devoted to meditation and contemplation of me. So, to take shelter in Bhagavan, to absorb the mind in him, this is the fundamental necessity to purify the mind, and to the extent that the mind is purified, then by the prevailing influence of bhakti, all these other qualities of non-attachment, non-identification with the body, equiposition towards worldly pleasures and pains, and compassion for others, non-enmity towards others, etc., all of these things come about in the wake of that purification and as a result of that intentness upon Bhagavan out of desire for him. So an extreme example of this can be found in the case of Haridas Thakur, after he was sentenced to be publicly beaten in 22 marketplaces for the quote-unquote offense he committed in the view of the authorities in his locality, as a result of his refusing to refrain from privately and quietly chanting the name of Sri Hari. So we talk all about offenses to the name. In this peculiar case, this great Mahatma, who was free from any aparad to the name, was considered an aparadi by the local government just for chanting the name, and was sentenced to severe punishment for such a quote-unquote aparad. But what did he do? This is a world-famous case of a tolerance to the extreme. So some excerpts from Chaitanya Bhagavat. Haridas felt only sorrow in his heart as a result of compassion for all the sinners who beat him in 22 different marketplaces on the order of the Qazi. He prayed for them, "O Krishna, please bestow grace upon all these jivas. May there be no offense on their part for assailing me." They beat him severely to take his life. There was no beating, however, on the path of Haridas's mind, it sounds funny in English, but it's like a play on words in Bengali, which is to say that he was not mentally disturbed at all by the physical beating. So although they were trying to kill him by beating him to death publicly, his mind was not, browbeaten at all. In other words, he was peaceful in his mind. Moreover, he showed no inimical feeling toward these persons, and moreover, he showed compassion and goodwill to them by praying that they not become implicated in any offense for what they're doing. In other words, he wished them well, despite them exerting the ultimate, harm against him. They all thought in their minds, "He has still not died, and we see that he is smiling at every moment. Is this man a saint?" All the Yavanas then said to him, "O Haridas, the death of us all will come about because of you. Even after all this beating, your life does not leave your body. the Kazi will take the lives of all of us because of this. So they've been ordered to kill him. If they don't kill him, then it will be assumed that they were derelict in their duty, and this will also create the opposite of the precedent that this Kazi is trying to set by publicly humiliating and killing someone who doesn't submit to the attitudes that he's trying to establish within his jurisdiction. So he'll kill the people who fail to execute the order to be sure to make a statement to society of what he's trying to establish. So now these persons who are killing him are worried, or trying to kill him rather, are worried that they're going to be killed. And they explain this to Haridas. So what does he do? Smiling, the Venerable Haridas said, "If by my living there is a problem for you all, then I will die. See this right now." "Oh, okay. You'll die if I don't die? Okay, I'll die." And then with a smile, so saying, he went into meditation and became absorbed. The master, Haridas, who was possessed of all Shakti, became motionless, and there was no breathing anywhere in his body. In other words, he just died, ostensibly. When all the Yavanas lifted him to take him to the Ganges, thinking him to have died, in other words, to throw his body down the river, which was considered a disgraceful way of disposing of the body of a Hindu within the non-Hindu society of that era, Haridas sat motionless. So in other words, he let them do it. In this way, Haridas floated down the Ganges. After some time, his external awareness returned by the will of Ishvara. In other words, Bhagavan brought him back to life, but he was content to give up his life for the sake of these people who were trying to kill him. So, what can we say? This is, tolerance and compassion to the extreme. Haridas Thakur can be seen here to exhibit all the requisite qualities of being tolerant like a tree. The capacity to remain non-inimical, non-vengeful, and non-angered by aggressors. The capacity to not object or complain about the actions of such persons. The capacity to foster goodwill towards such persons and support them even at one's own expense. The capacity to sustain such behavior without seeking to attain some favor or reward in exchange for doing so, and the capacity to remain content within oneself all the while. So, although such a profound degree of tolerance, compassion, and devotion to Sri Bhagavan is certainly a great inspiration to sadhakas, for many, it can also feel like a standard that is impossible to live up to. It is thus important for sadhakas who may feel themselves to be very far from such a pure state of mind as is observed in Haridas Thakur, to understand how they can practically make progress from wherever they are towards the state of absorption of the mind in bhakti, as found in Mahatmas like Haridas Thakur, that gives rise to the quality of being tolerant like a tree. So, in other words, we can quote these, we can recount these events of these great Mahatmas, but the reality of, the lives of most in the modern day is that they're far from the character and attitudes of such great Mahatmas or persons described in the Puranas and so forth. So, it is important to hear about these, great examples and these great virtuous persons. But at the same time, it can also sometimes lead to people feeling like it's impossible for one to go to that extreme, and then it feels also unfit to remain in the position one is in, but there doesn't seem to be a way to go from 0 to 100, so it can lead to a state of frustration or dismay or a lack of clarity about what to practically do. And as we've seen so far, the quality that's considered most practical or fundamental to all these other things is the importance of fixing the mind on Bhagavan, and how it's through that conviction in being a Sharanagata in Bhagavan, and as such offering the mind, dedicating one's faculties to Bhagavan, that gradually gives rise to the purification of the mind that enables all these qualities to be genuinely present and sustained and manifest in one's behavior, then the question becomes, well, how can I engage in this practice in a level that's suitable to me in the stage that I'm in, so that I can gradually approach such, an ideal as we've seen described in this analogy of tolerance like a tree, as per the way it's explained by Kaviraj Goswami in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we get a very nice gradation in practical instructions regarding practice in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 12, on the topic of Bhakti Yoga, which in all places, surprise, surprise, immediately precedes these list of qualities. In other words, prior to mentioning all these qualities, the exact practice that's done that gives rise to them is taught. So, as all these qualities in this verse, Tṛṇād sunīcena, are found in that section of the Gita, then we can infer that the practice or mode of bhakti that gives rise to these qualities would apply to the means by which one can successfully put this verse into practice. So the verse itself says, kīrtanīyaḥ sadā hariḥ, or let kirtan be done of Bhagavan, and as we discussed, that's what's called upalakshana, or an indicator of practices of bhakti in general. So how exactly can one go about such practices in a way that will lead to the purification of the mind, in a way that will lead to the establishment of these qualities within one's disposition? Bhagavan Sri Krishna thus gives the following gradation of instructions regarding the practice of Bhakti Yoga in Bhagavad Gita 12:8-12, just prior to the aforecited enumeration of the qualities of his bhakta. So he gives the following instructions, and we'll look at the commentaries on them, which give a very important, practical, or they give a viewpoint that shows how these things can actually be attuned to and applied in one's life. So first of all, the instructions in the Gita are as follows. Fix the mind only on me. Absorb the intellect in me. Thereafter, you will dwell in me alone. There is no doubt. If you are unable to fully fix the mind on me steadily, O Dhananjaya, then try to attain me by means of the practice of repeated concentration, meaning concentration upon me. If you are incapable of repeated concentration as well, then be one for whom actions related to me is paramount. So this is, again, kind of a literal way of rendering what's there, but in other words, it means one who primarily engages in actions related to me. By performing actions just for my sake, you will attain success, or siddhi. Contemplation is indeed better than repeated concentration, and meditation is superior to contemplation. From meditation comes relinquishment of the results of action, and thereafter, from relinquishment, peace. So let's now look at Chakravarti Pad's commentary on this set of instructions, which gives us more understanding of how they're meant to be practically applied. So, quote, fix the mind only on me. When Krishna says that, what does he mean? Does he mean me as I appear in the world, or as I am as Brahman, or as I am in Vaikuntha, or what? So he takes it to mean Shama Sundar wearing a yellow garment and a forest garland. This means perform smarana or meditation on me. So when he says meditate on me, we take that from the Gaudiya Vaishnava angle of vision to mean the Krishna of Vrindavan, the Dhira Lalita Nayaka, who is the Ishta Devata of the compiler of our Padyavali. Fix the mind on that Krishna. Perform meditation on him. Okay, similarly, absorb the intellect possessed of discernment in me. So what does that mean? This means perform contemplation of me. So what does he mean by contemplation or mānadena? that contemplation, furthermore, is continued study, or the exact word he uses is anushilana, of the statements in the Shastra that are supportive of, that is, that serve to strengthen and enrich meditation upon me. Then, furthermore, you will dwell in me alone. You will attain residence right in my midst. So fix the mind on me, and if that doesn't happen, then practice contemplation on me. In other words, study the Shastra, or study the poetry, study the statements of great bhaktas that provide content that enable you to meditate on me. So fix the mind on me, and you'll only ever succeed in doing that if you first acquired content to meditate upon. And that content is what's found in the Shastra, what's found in the words of great bhaktas who have anubhav of Bhagavan. So continually study their words, their statements, such that one has a richness or a wealth of content or material by which one can meditate upon me. And then you will succeed in meditating upon me, and as a result of that, you will dwell in me. You will attain me. So this is step one, or this is the highest rung, if you will. And so then he scales back from persons who are not at that level. Then what can they do? Sri Krishna then describes the means to attain direct meditation for one who is incapable of that. Ata, he speaks verse 9. The flow of the flowing river of the mind among contemptible forms, tastes, and so on, that is, the various objects of the external senses, stopping that flow among those objects and gradually establishing that flow among my supremely auspicious forms, tastes, and so on, by means of the practice of repeated concentration, that is, by means of the practice of, or yoga of abhyas, that is, the practice of repeatedly retracting the mind after it has again and again gone elsewhere, and fixing it on my form alone, is the meaning of the instruction given in this verse. So there are statements of Shankaracharya, of Ramanujacharya, and other earlier writers that describe meditation as like the flow of a stream of honey, or the flow of a stream of oil. So a thick, rich substance which flows in such a continuous way that it almost looks as if it's just floating in air. If you've ever poured honey from one cup to another and raised the cups high above each other and watched the stream come. So, in other words, it's an uninterrupted flow. So they compare meditation to that. Meditation is not concentration, it's where the mind is just absorbed and automatically fixated upon its object without one having to try to be so. So he's saying that for those who don't reach that state of absorption or don't reach that state of fixity, then they engage in this process of concentration where they experience distraction, and then the task of refocusing the mind, and then finding the mind again distracted, and then again refocusing it. If one's attempt at meditation results in that, then by this analysis one isn't actually meditating as such, but one is practicing what's called abhyas, or an attempt to concentrate, or an attempt to reach the state of meditation by repeatedly bringing the mind back after each time it's distracted. So for those who, whether or not someone can meditate as described, one can understand easily for oneself if one sits for 5 minutes and tries, and can watch whether their mind remains fixed or it runs here, there, and all over the universe. So if it runs here and there all over the place, then you understand you're not a person who's eligible for this first instruction, because it's not happening. You're already doing this process of repeatedly refocusing the mind, so you're practicing abhyas. So in that case, he's saying that that's where many will find themselves. And this depends upon, as we discussed earlier, the relative degree of the purification of the mind, or the more the mind is purified of extraneous desires, the more steadily the practice of concentration, or the closest to absorption in meditation, one will become. And the opposite is vice versa. But some may find even this process of abhyas very difficult to do. So what about them? Abhyasepi, that is, in the 10th verse, the purport is that if it is thought by Arjuna, quote, as a tongue afflicted by jaundice does not desire sugar candy, so exactly the mind afflicted by ignorance does not take to your form and so forth, even though they are sweet. Therefore, to fight with this extremely powerful, obstinate mind is not at all possible for me. In other words, if one tries to practice this abhyas and feels defeated, or feels that this is too hard, or that I'm not getting anywhere with this, I'm not having any success in this process, even though I can understand that it would be great if it worked, or I can understand that Krishna is the most worthy object of meditation, and that if my mind were purified of all these worldly attachments, then it would be a supremely relishable experience. But because removing the impurities of the mind is not so simple as simply acquiring knowledge, that's not happening. So what can someone do who struggles to perform abhyas? Then that's given in the next rung of instruction. Krishna says something hopeful. He says, even without meditation upon me, one for whom actions related to me are paramount, by performing these actions, such as hearing about me, praising me, offering obeisance to me, worshipping me, sweeping and washing my temple, picking flowers, and other services, will attain success or siddhi in the form of being an associate or parshad of mine endowed with prema. So he's saying one can still achieve the goal even if one can't perform meditation. Even if one doesn't have the purity of mind required to engage in smarana or meditation, still one can practice shravana, kirtana, vandana, archana, other varieties of bhakti sadhana, and by those means of bhakti sadhana also achieve the status of being a parshad of Bhagavan with prema. So when the mind is not sufficiently purified to remain steady, better to engage in action, or better to engage in something that involves the senses and the body and is more readily suited to being an activity that one can get absorbed in, or one can do without being distracted and led into other things. So he elaborates further on this. This practice of bhakti, furthermore, is of two types. That constituted of operation of the inner means, or antakarana, the subtle body, the manas, buddhi, ahankar, and citta, and that constituted of operation of the external means, or bahikarana, that is, the external senses fixed upon Bhagavan. So he's giving a framework to understand these instructions that have been given so far. The practice of meditation, the practice of abhyas, the practice of contemplation as a means to support those two, those are functions of the antakaran, or of the subtle body, and activities like hearing, chanting, worshipping, these involve the external senses, or what's called the bahikaran. So they're divided into two categories based on the faculties that are used to perform them. In this regard, the first type is of three subtypes. That constituted of meditation, which was mentioned first in Bhagavad Gita 12.8. That constituted of contemplation, which was also mentioned in 12.8. And that the form of which is repeated practice, abhyas of that is of meditation, for those possessed of affinity for that is for meditation, in the case of their incapability of unbroken meditation, which was mentioned in verse 9. These three are difficult for those of ill mind. There you go. Simply put, if the mind is impure, these things are tough. For those of fine mind, that is, those free from aparad, however, these are certainly easy. So if the mind is purified, then for it to be fixated on something that's extremely relishable is not difficult. It's the easiest thing to do, so to speak. But when the impurity of aparad is in the mind, then that's why he gave that analogy about jaundice. Even this thing that's so sweet doesn't taste sweet at all. The second type of bhakti yoga, that constituted of operation of the external means, the external senses, constituted of hearing and praising Shravana Kirtana of Bhagavan, which was described in 12.10, is a means that is certainly easy for everyone. So he's saying, Shravan Kirtan, this is more widely accessible. This is suitable for anybody. Meditation, concentration, this requires a greater degree of purity of mind. One has to be free from aparad to a much greater extent. So the people who are capable of this is much smaller group. But the people who are capable of Shravan and Kirtan and these other practices that involve external senses, this is a wide group. And still, the highest goal can be achieved even by the member, even by the general group, or even by those people who are suited to sadhana that focuses or uses primarily the external senses. So, one more paragraph here. Contemplation, that is, contemplation of me, as stated in 12.8, quote, absorb the intellect in me, mayi buddhim niveshaya, is better than repeated concentration, or abhyas. When repeated concentration occurs, meditation shall occur only with difficulty, whereas when contemplation occurs, meditation shall occur indeed without difficulty. In other words, if one just tries to fix the mind on an object, but one doesn't have awareness of the richness and the qualities of that object, it's a more dry process of simply putting the mind on an object. But when the mind is put on the object and there's also contemplation of the qualities of that object, or the leelas, the etc. of the object, then the mind becomes absorbed, the mind experiences a greater degree of richness, if you will, in its absorption in that object, such that it of itself remains gravitated upon that object. So this is the importance of contemplation, or why it's also said that, there's a difference between meditating on a mantra without understanding its meaning and meditation on a mantra after one has contemplated and understood its meaning. The same goes for leelas, etc. Because of this distinction, meditation is superior even to contemplation. This is the meaning. Why, one may ask? Thus he says that from meditation shall occur relinquishment, or tyag, of, that is, an absence of desire for, the results of desirous action, or the karma fall, that is, the pleasures of svarga and so on, and relinquishment of the results of desireless action, that is, moksha. So, why is this meditation so great, or why is it considered such a high state? Because in that state, the mind is experiencing such a degree of satisfaction that it relinquishes, or it becomes indifferent to all other objects of desire, be they of the sensory world or even those of moksha. So when the mind, you say, the mind can't do without some type of pleasure. So when it gets pleasure in the object of meditation of Bhagavan, then it can just remain completely fixed there and become indifferent to all other objects which may, according to worldly samskaras, have produced pleasure in the past, or may be thought to produce pleasure in the future by virtue of knowledge of the idea that moksha is a state of satisfaction. So what's really key, so to speak, is to reach the state of purity wherein the mind can feel pleasure in something that's inherently pleasing to Bhagavan, or inherently related to Bhagavan. Once one reaches that stage, then it's like the wind is in your favor, or you're, coasting downhill, or, then the way that the mind is built and works starts to automatically support and fortify one's involvement in what is one's object, or service activities and connection with Bhagavan. So disregard for these, even when they're attained of their own accord, shall occur. In other words, it's not just that one's indifferent to them, but then when someone comes along and gives them to you, then it's like, oh, well, why not? Rather, one will genuinely be so satisfied in that meditation upon Bhagavan that even if someone, has it in front of you like an apple in the palm of the hand, still you don't want it. So that shows really what the mind is fixated on, or what you really desire at that stage. Prior to unwavering meditation, bhaktas in whom rati or bhava bhakti has not manifested shall only have a desire to relinquish moksha, whereas those who have unwavering meditation shall have actual disregard for moksha. This is described as follows in the 11th canto. Quote, one who has offered oneself to me desires neither the post of Brahma, nor the abode of Indra, nor dominion over the entire earth, nor reign over Patala, nor the cities of yoga, nor non-repetition of birth, that is moksha, nor anything else apart from me. Here, quote, one who has offered oneself to me refers to one who has fixity in meditation upon me. So the very same point that was said here in verse 14 of the Gita and was made by Jiva Gosvami related to the list of the qualities in the 11th canto, then this exact same point comes here, that one who's offered the self to me, one who's taken shelter in me, one who's absorbed the mind in me, that's the person that all these qualities appear within. That's the person who bhakti, brings about the manifestation of these qualities within. So when that offering of the mind of the self occurs, such that the mind becomes absorbed and satisfied in fixity and service to Bhagavan, then there is this relinquishment, or this letting go of desire and objects of desire, full stop for anything else. So from relinquishment, that is the absence of desire. So this is very important definition. The word tyag, sometimes people think it means renunciation or, abandonment of something, but he's saying tyag actually means the absence of desire for something. Because you can still, by force give something up even when you still want it. That's called tapasya. But here, the way he's doing tyag, the way he's explaining tyag is that there's an actual absence of any interest in the thing. That's really to have let it go, so to speak, or relinquished it. And only thereafter is there peace. That is, desisting from the senses, desisting of the senses from all objects except my forms, qualities, and so forth. In other words, when there's no desire for anything else, then the senses, the attention of the mind doesn't drive the senses anywhere else, it just remains fixed upon Bhagavan. And it's in that state, in gist, that Haridas Thakur did what he did. It's in that state that Tṛṇād tolerated what he tolerated. It's in that state that all of these great bhaktas exhibited all of these, what you might call superhuman feats. So, just about over time, but just because it summarizes the whole topic we've discussed today, I'm going to read one more paragraph so that we, tie in the whole discussion. So from this explanation, it is to be gathered that offense, aparad, is the principal contamination of the mind that makes absorption of the mind in meditation and contemplation upon Bhagavan difficult to practice. For those who suffer from the ill effects of past offenses, and thus find themselves beset with the inability to fix the mind in meditation, contemplation, or repeated concentration upon Bhagavan, practices of bhakti such as kirtan of Bhagavan and hearing about Bhagavan that include engagement of the external senses are recommended. as a sadhaka becomes purified by the form of sadhana best suited to their stage, personal disposition, and mental state. The mind will become purified, and the capacity to absorb the mind in Bhagavan will increase. To the extent that this increases, relinquishment of the results of action, that is, the absence of desire for those results, be they forms of sensory experience in the world or other worldly attainments such as svarga or moksha, ensues. And as a result of the absence of such desire, the mind enters a state of peace, shanti. That is, it withdraws from external objects and easily remains fixed upon Bhagavan. So peace is only achievable through desirelessness. This is, the gist of the whole discussion. It was in this state of purity and peace of mind that Haridas so greatly pleased Bhagavan with his chanting of Sri Bhagavan's name, and became empowered by Bhagavan to exhibit such extraordinary tolerance, compassion, and fixity, as was described in the aforesaid passage from Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. Since Chakravarti Pad explains that the qualities mentioned in Bhagavad Gita 12, 13, and 14, those of being non-inimical, friendly, and compassionate towards all beings, free from possessiveness, free from egotism, equal towards suffering and happiness, forbearing, ever contented, of mind and intellect offered to Bhagavan, and so on, are the result of the peace described in Bhagavad Gita 12:12. That is, they are not mundane qualities, but rather characteristics that emerge from the peace that emerges from the practice of bhakti described in verses 8 through 12. So this is a very important concluding siddhanta from Chakravarti Pad. He's saying that bhakti utta shanti utta dharma na prakrita guna bhaktya santushtati krishnana gunai iti kotitaha. That it's well known, and as it was discussed earlier in the Padyavali, Krishna is not pleased by qualities in the conventional sense, he's only pleased by bhakti. So all these qualities that are mentioned here are not conventional qualities, but they're characteristics that are produced by shanti, or they're produced by the mind being free from other desires. And that state of the mind being free from other desires is caused by the mind being absorbed in bhakti. So, this is how one can understand the practical means of acquisition of all of these qualities, is that one has to engage the mind in bhakti, be it along with the external senses in practices like hearing, chanting, worshipping, and so on, or alone by means of contemplation, meditation, what have you. And it's by means of that the effects of past aparad, the desirousness for other objects, is gradually purged from the mind, which leads to a state of peace. And in that state of peace, then this absence of enmity, and this non-attachment, and this lack of egotism, and this equiposition, and all of these other wonderful virtues genuinely are present in the disposition of a person, and remain steady even when tested by circumstances. So, for persons who want to follow the advice of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to do kirtan with humility and tolerance and respectfulness for others and a lack of conceit or a lack of attachment to honor, then one has to practice that, but at the same time, it's principally the kirtan, or it's principally the bhakti that one does, that will also purify the mind and enable one to have those qualities. So what this produces is a little bit of what appears to be a catch-22, or in other words, the qualities that are needed to fully engage in meditation and worship of Bhagavan are produced by performing worship of Bhagavan. So how do you perform activities that require qualities that are only acquired by performing the activity that leads to the acquisition of the qualities? So it can seem like a trap or like a catch-22. So that's what we'll discuss next time, is how to navigate that impasse, or this is how the path of bhakti is felt to be a struggle for those who are in the early stages of it. So I'll conclude here for today, and we'll go further into this practical analysis next time. Yes, I see a hand.
Am I hearable?
Yes, I hear you.
Rather.
Thank
you for this presentation. A few things that I want to not clarify, but actually voice out. Like in the past, today you explained very nicely the verse that actually, highlights the qualities of the devotees. To be, how I call this? The point is that the statement that I heard in the past is that Vaishnavas have better qualities than those who are not. I mean, those who worship Bhagavan, and even if they don't have the same qualities as ideally, like those who may have good qualities but not the devotees of Bhagavan, still the devotees are on a higher stand. And it is very conflicting to me to understand, because how can someone be dishonest or impatient or intolerant, be a devotee at the same time, and be put on a high pedestal to someone who actually is tolerant, actually is honest and have all the good qualities, but is put down in the face of a devotee who doesn't have these qualities. But the way how you explained, I didn't really catch that point, but what I understood is that if you are actually absorbed in Bhagavan, like genuinely, sincerely, then you're considering this part of statement that you're better studied than those who are not devotees. But can you elaborate a little bit more on this? Because I don't really, I try to understanding it. I think I understand it, but not really, because this devotee who is fully absorbed, and because of he's completely sheltered by Bhagavan, he will naturally be patient, and naturally be honest, naturally will have tolerance and all of the qualities. So that's the main thing I remember what your presentation comes from. But what about those who are not like fully absorbed but still on a path? Are they still considered to have better qualities or not?
So there's a categorical distinction made based on the motivation for the cultivation or expression of the quality. In other words, someone acts tolerant or someone acts respectful. But what is motivating them to treat another person with respect or tolerance? A person, let's say a conventional person who's not involved in spiritual culture, they may respect another person because they want to be respected. And they know that if they don't act respectful, they're not going to be treated with respect back. If they act like a jerk, people are not going to like them. So they act nice so that people act nice to them. So they may be very nice. and that's nice. We're not here to discourage anyone from being nice. But the fundamental character of that exhibition of respect is self-interested and external. It's related to the world of bodily identification and sensory exchange. Whereas, in the case of a bhakta, who sees the presence of Bhagavan within everyone, acts nice or acts respectful to people because of the indwelling presence of Bhagavan within them, because Bhagavan is supremely worshipable, because that person is a dwelling place of their Ishta Devata, etc., all these points we've discussed earlier, then there's a fundamentally different motivation and there's a different scope of potential in the exhibition of that quality. Because the person who acts nice conditionally, as soon as the condition is not met, that quality might evaporate in a moment. But in the case of a bhakta, they can retain that quality even if there isn't categorical reciprocation from the other. So there's a greater scope of depth when the quality is expressed on the basis of bhakti rather than on the basis of the pursuit of the satisfaction of whatever false self someone identifies with. There's a greater scope of depth for it, and there's a greater, there's a distinct underlying motivation for it. In that sense, it's a quote different quality. So the point of Prahlad Maharaj's statement is not simply to bash on people who are not bhaktas, or to try to, say that bhaktas are better than everyone else just because they're bhaktas or something like this. But the point is to show that Mahatmas have these incredible qualities that are exhibited to a depth that is truly impressive. In other words, like what was shown here by Haridas Thakur, that, that goes far beyond the scope of any kind of conventional display of virtue, and wouldn't be possible were it not for the level of spiritual perception and absorption that he had. And
so
okay, go ahead.
So basically, the statement refers only to Sharanagata bhaktas, or is there any like Ekanta bhaktas? How would you qualify? What group of devotees are referred to by saying that they actually display the true qualities? Would it be Ekanta bhaktas or even Sharanagata can be anybody? But how would you define Mahatma? Right?
Well, so, the verse itself says that all qualities reside in full within one who has unconditional bhakti to Bhagavan.
Okay.
Unconditional was defined in the commentary as nishkam, or desireless. So there's a gradation. To the extent that one is nishkam, to the extent one has those qualities.
I see.
So when people are identifying with the false self, pursuing types of pleasure and happiness that are based on all types of specific worldly conditions, then under certain conditions they may exhibit virtues, but as soon as those conditions change, their behavior is also liable to change. So there's a less scope for depth and genuineness in the qualities that they exhibit. Whereas in the case of a bhakta who has perception of Bhagavan being all-pervading, there's a constancy or a scope for consistency in the behavior of the bhakta because it's independent of the immediate circumstances or the immediate conditions that one is in, or how those conditions play out in comparison to some worldly attachments that someone has.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is being made about Mahatmas. In other words, if you try to apply this to, the local bhaktas that live on your block, so to speak, you might not see a huge distinction between them and, other persons in the neighborhood. But what this is pointing at is the trajectory or the potential that this premise of bhakti and the effects that bhakti can produce has.
So in one's own practice or discipline life, from what you're saying, the main focus of sadhaka is to actually take complete shelter, focus on taking shelter of Bhagavan rather than actually working on his own qualities.
Sorry, rather
because
than what?
Like working on one's own good qualities, or I have to be respectful, I have to be, actually consciously acting the qualities that one may not possess, like tolerance and many other qualities, that good qualities. So is sadhaka rather is directed to taking shelter of Bhagavan, by which you understand, you manifest these qualities, or simultaneously one has to also practice those qualities artificially if he doesn't have them, while taking shelter. But from what
I mean, the main thrust will be on the sharanagati, on the absorption of the mind, engagement in the practices of bhakti. That has to be the primary driver. But at the same time, we're getting educated here in what these virtues are, and we do aspire to practice them, and we will understand in the social circumstances what is ideal behavior and make an effort to perform that way. So, we won't necessarily be reckless, so to speak, or just say, oh, I'm going to just sit around and do a bunch of kirtan and magically I'm going to become perfect. There will also be some concerted effort at behaving respectfully and kindly and so on. But in the main, that will come in the wake of the purification of the mind and in the wake of the depth of experience that one has of the form, qualities, leelas, etc. of Bhagavan. If really desire for him is becoming intensified, then really one's attachments and identification with all this stuff in the mundane is going to go down. And when that attachment is going down or it's evaporating, then one isn't going to get disturbed or perceive people as inimical who are coming to threaten those things that one is no longer attached to. That's, what we've discussed over the recent classes. Such that Chakravarti Pad went so far as to say that a bhakta doesn't even have to try to think this way because they're just don't even identify with it in the first place. So that's the ideal situation to be in, but most sadhakas are not at all at that level yet. So in the earlier stages, there'll be a blend of two, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. Can I have another point? Because
Sure.
Can I? Or
Yeah,
is there
sure.
another question here there? I don't know to take all time. Okay, so this 12th chapter you mentioned. I really pay attention to those 12th chapter options that Krishna gives. The best if you meditate on me. If not, then you practice. If you're gonna do this, then you work for me. If you're gonna do this, you do something else, and like that. So, and in the past, I was contemplating. Actually, I heard people also sharing the same idea. Okay, if you're gonna do it, do something else. If you're gonna do this, do something else. But they are not. But from your presentation, I understood that they're not separate compartments. Actually, all of them lead to meditation of Bhagavan. So if you cannot do all this high, concentration and meditation, and if you're going to do abhyas even, then you advise to do work for him. And then this work, should your absorption lead you to actually this first option, meaning absorbing your mind in me. So all of those mentioned, they lead actually to full absorption in Bhagavan. And that has to be, but otherwise if this is not properly understood, people get stuck or one may get stuck in one of those options. Okay, I'll be working for Krishna, and the absorption will never come because I'm just working for Krishna. I believe this is the right understanding of what you presented today.
Yes, I mean, here when he says mad karma paramo, according to Chakravarti Pad, the word karma there means forms of sadhana bhakti. But in any case, that even those types of sadhana bhakti that are performed with the senses, hearing, chanting, worshipping, etc., that those are performed with the orientation that one become mentally focused and that so to speak, one is on a trajectory towards greater absorption in the mind as a result of doing that sadhana. That orientation is important because if one is thinking, just doing these activities regardless of whether my mind is absorbed or regardless of whether I have any depth of contemplation about who I'm hearing about or who I'm worshipping, that's irrelevant, then what that leads to is people getting really into the musical side of kirtan, to social development of bhakti, congregations and preaching and all these things that are superfluous to an individual's actual trajectory of purification and pursuit of direct divine experience. So when one doesn't understand why those practices that involve external senses are even given in the first place, and rather one takes the external aspect of them to be a launching pad for more integration with the external sphere and the social sphere and the honor sphere and all of that, then you get what they call the bhakti-yukta anarthas, or then as a result of bhakti you get anarthas also coming up as a result of that. So this explanation of Chakravarti Pad is very valuable because it underscores, or it shows how Krishna is fundamentally requesting the bhakta for his mind, which is the hardest thing to give, the most important thing to give. In the very end of the Gita, what does he say? Mānadena bhava mad bhakto. And Baladeva Dibhushan has a very nice comment on that verse, where he says that a minister is a bhakta, so to speak, of a king. He serves the king, but his mind is not on the king. His mind is on his family. His mind is on who is dear to him, but his actions are with the king. So he says that Krishna's instruction, Mānadena bhava mad bhakto, the import of it is to not be like the minister who does, so to speak, bhakti to the king, but keeps his sense of dearness and mental attachment in someone else. Rather, do activities of bhakti externally with the fundamental orientation that Krishna is my ultimate object of dearness and the ultimate object that my mind is attached to. And that's what Krishna is asking for people. And similarly, in the Chatushloki of the Gita, how does he describe the person who he reveals himself to? He describes them as the Buddha Bhava Samanvita, the person who understands me and is filled with bhav for me, and is Mat Chitta Mat Gata Prana, whose mind is fixed on me, whose life airs are flowing only towards me. That's the person who I enlighten with the means to attain me. That's the person whose mind becomes completely purified. So here in the chapter about Bhakti Yoga, there in the final instructions of the whole Gita, there in the Chatushloki of the Gita, everywhere where it really matters, we have to see where Krishna is putting the force. He's asking for people for the thing that's the hardest to give, their mind and what they hold most dear. He's coming, he wants nothing less than that. And as long as sadhana is practiced with the idea that we can retain that and give money and give this and that and all these other things, or we can do all these activities, or we can create all these social events, or we can do all this stuff in the world for him, but we don't actually give him our mind, and we don't actually really leave all other undertakings solely to absorb our mind in him. As long as that twist is still held back, you haven't actually understood what Krishna is asking of you in the Gita. You haven't actually really followed what he's really teaching.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. This is awesome. Nice connection, shlokas. But some people may also argue that, I work, do so much service and so absorbed in service and saying, I'm absorb my mind in Krishna. But that's tricky because then maybe should be absorbed just and realizing that, I'm doing so much service. I'm the one who does service. This self-aggrandizement, basically. Yeah, you're right.
Can be, everything depends on, circumstances, individuals, cases.
Thanks so much. It's very nice Sunday between all this. Thank you.
Sure. All right, well, it looks like that's it for today. So we'll continue. Next time we'll get to this catch-22 of how one without the qualities has to practice the acts of bhakti that require the qualities to properly be practiced, and how this struggle goes on for some stage, but how gradually purification and the acquisition of these qualities unfold from the heartfelt efforts of the sadhakas in these practices. So this applies to the quality or the acquisition of all the requisite elements of being tolerant like a tree, as well as to all the other three qualities mentioned in this verse of Mahaprabhu. So further practical analysis will ensue, and then we'll get to the final quality of humility. Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai Shri Radhe.